So questions. For the rest of the session, the floor is open for your questions. And I'll just give a few general guidelines for the question period before I hand it over to my colleague Chris Menzies, who is an engagement specialist at the AER. So first of all, please ask just one question at a time in the Q&A to allow for more efficient and effective response. You can ask as many times as you want, but try and just ask one question with each submission. Due to limited time, not all of the questions may be answered within the session, and questions we cannot answer here will receive written responses and will help inform our future website updates as well. In writing your question, please be respectful of everyone participating in the session and the many perspectives that they bring. I'll now pass you to Chris, who will moderate the question and answer session. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Carol, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We're so excited to be having this opportunity to engage with you and to share about rock-hosted mineral regulation. And at this time, I'd love to invite the presenters to turn on their cameras so that we can have a really engaging question and answer period. So as Carol has mentioned, and we want to just happily reiterate it again, please submit your questions in writing using the Q&A app just at the top of your screen. If you would like to remain anonymous in your question, that's totally cool. Please email us at minerals@aer.ca with your question, and we'll make sure to honor your confidentiality. Again, that email address is minerals@aer.ca. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to those of you who submitted your questions in advance. We got some really great questions from members of the public with important interests that many Albertans share. Some of the interests that we received are just outside of the Alberta Energy Regulator's jurisdiction and authority, as Jeff had explained and Sandra had elaborated on as well during the presentation. So what we can do is we will be sure to respond to those questions in writing after we pass it to our colleagues in the Government of Alberta. We have some colleagues from the Government of Alberta who have joined us today from Department of Energy and Minerals, as well as Indigenous Relations. And if there are questions that are not within their scope, we will find the right party to send that question to. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Brenda for submitting a question early. The question is as follows. It's related to, and I'd actually like to ask Kelsey and Jan to be prepared to respond to this. And this is related to, sometimes people will Google brine-hosted minerals or lithium development and they'll see big ponds in South America. And we want to just provide a little bit of clarity and context. So the question is as follows. Lithium fields in South America use an evaporative process to produce the lithium through these big ponds, which use a lot of water. I'm wondering if Jan and Kelsey, if you could please talk a little bit about how lithium development may look like in Alberta.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I'm Jan Rempel, Senior Advisor, Operational Liaison and Integration Specialist. So first and foremost, Alberta doesn't have the climate for salar ponds. We wouldn't be able to evaporate the lithium. So lithium in Alberta production looks like oil and gas production. It'll be produced, lithium will be produced through brine, so subsurface saline water. It'll be produced through a well. It'll go through a process at a facility that looks similar to an oil or gas facility, and the lithium will be extracted using a method called direct lithium extraction, is what industry is working on right now. And essentially, what it's going to look like on the landscape to you is a building or a CCAN or there'll be a shack or a building that has these instrument processes in it. The the process is similar to a water softener in your house. It's a sort of chemical ion process that is occurring that extracts the lithium from the produced brine. And it's then reduced down to a condensed liquid form or a powdery salt, maybe even a cake form, to then be transported on for further processing to be made into battery metals. So the brine that they're using is very, very salty. And Kelsey, perhaps you can give a better description on where this brine is coming from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that. Thanks for that answer, Jan. You did a fabulous job. So yeah, my name's Kelsey. I'm the Director of Geology and Resources with the Alberta Geologic Survey. And I, just to maybe add on a little bit to what Jan had said, and it was a fabulous response, is really just, I think, in many other jurisdictions, there's various formats for extracting lithium. In Alberta, as Jan was mentioning, it's mostly from brines. And so, if you get a chance, you can check that out on that Alberta Interactive Mineral Map and actually look at the brine concentration data that we have available. And you can see where it's located throughout the province. But much of this data is from those deep saline wells and reservoirs. And so it's well below the base of groundwater protection, and, extracted up kind of through wells. The lithium's extracted and the saline liquids are put back. So Jan, I definitely would let her speak more to the process. But yeah, happy to answer any other questions if there are about some of the lithium concentration and where it's located in the province. But I would just want to reemphasize that in Alberta, lithium extraction is primarily via brines than from a mining process.
Thank you so much, Jan and Kelsey. So it's really great to know that the brine-hosted minerals are coming up through a well, being treated by a chemical process it's, as you mentioned, similar to a water softener, where you collect out the precipitated brine and then recycle that used water back into the aquifer, so there won't be evaporative ponds in the province. Appreciate that analogy and that example as well. And we had a couple of questions in the chat, and we just wanted to let you know that we will be sharing some resources in the chat as well. So as you may have noticed, we put a link in the chat to the interactive mineral map that Kelsey had demonstrated. And in addition to the resources in the chat, we will be posting a recording of this presentation as well as the slide deck on the website within the coming days. And so you can expect to receive an update from us after the event, along with the survey, with information about where you can find those resources. And you can look at them as many times as you want and share them with your friends. So with that, I'll go to another question that we received in advance of today's session, and I'll ask that Sandra be available to respond to this question. This question is about how can we help, how can we ensure that, everybody has the opportunity to participate in the market for rock-hosted mineral potential. So the question is as such, and it's from Bradley. So thank you for your question, Bradley. Historically, the vast majority of mineral discoveries are made by small independents and often sole prospectors. How does the Alberta Energy Regulator propose to regulate the exploration process so as to ensure that the public's interest is met and the environment is protected, while not making the regulatory process so onerous that explorers are not able to cost and effectively continue their work in creating a project? And please let me know if you need me to reiterate that question.
That is a fantastic question. And so Right now, exploration currently in Alberta is regulated by the government. So if one of our energy guys wants to hop on, just in case I misspeak at all in this aspect. But one of the big things is fairness and equity. And so one of the things, like Kelsey had mentioned with AGS, is making sure that all the available data that we have is available to everybody. So regardless of size, regardless of all of those entities, that anybody can grab them when needed and then utilize it however is fit for the appropriateness of that. And then for the regulatory process itself for exploration, we're not 100% yet, as we're not the regulators of it, but it is. We would love to hear any feedback on any options or improvements or suggestions that anybody has from where we're at now and what currently occurs in the province.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And while I have your attention, maybe I'll ask you a quick follow-up question. And maybe Jeff can support this question potentially. And this relates to the jurisdictional question. The question is from our chat, and I'm going to do my best for those in the audience to mix up pre-submitted questions with those questions that we're receiving live. So this one is from our chat today, and the question is as follows. If the Alberta Energy Regulator's scope or jurisdiction is outside of, say, the landowner who is there to protect, what authority or what jurisdiction or what government agency is there available to protect the landowner or potentially a municipality?
So thank you very much for that question. And I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sandra. I'm one of the advisors, regulatory with the AER. And so it depends, but I'm going to contextualize it because there's multiple ways. And so with the AER itself, and I'm going to put a link in the chat once I finish this, there's multiple ways to get your say. So there is, and I have another screen here. So if I'm looking off screen for everybody, I'm reading. So if there's a general question, it depends if it's an incident or an emergency, if you want to file a complaint, if the activity is directly impacting you or affecting you, even in the development stage, if you want to participate in a hearing, all those kind of things. We have multiple different venues for that within the AER. However, that's not the only thing that landowners can go to. There's also I believe it's the Land and Property Tribunal, as well as the Farmers Advocate Office, for depending on what the concern and protection is that the landowners are looking for, the land users are looking for.
Thank you so much for that response. So I mentioned before, we have colleagues from the government of Alberta who have been generous with their time today. And I would like to ask that Shoshi be available from the Department of Energy and Minerals to respond to a question related to coal. The question is as follows. Why is metallurgical coal not considered a critical mineral? There's some additional context I'd like to share as well. Not only is it crucial for the green transition, for example, its use in making various products like solar panels, electric car batteries, and windmills, but everything made from steel needs metallurgical coal as well. It is also needed for national defense and security and to grow our economy. So if other jurisdictions, for example, in Europe, in the European Union, have designated metallurgical coal as a critical mineral, what can you explain Alberta's rationale?
Hi, Chris. Thanks. That's a very great question. So in terms of the Mineral Strategy and Action Plan and the actions that surround it, it focuses heavily on metallic and industrial minerals. As part of that, we have identified a list of potential minerals in Alberta that has the potential to be developed and support this growth for global demand. Our list also matches that of the Canadian critical minerals that has been put out a few years ago. And as it aligns with that, currently metallurgical coal is not listed on there as a critical mineral. However, this doesn't mean, though it may not be considered in the future, it is just not considered as part of the current mineral strategy. Similarly, how helium was not included because we only included metallic and industrial minerals. Helium is a natural gas. So just recently, due to the demand of helium, we included that as part of Alberta's mineral strategy and action plan, even though it's considered as natural gas. So not saying that it's not going to be considered. There is tons of work underway, both from the province and other industrial developers on this commodity, and we look forward to the development of this industry as well.
Thank you so much, Shoshi, for your response, and thank you for joining us today. This next question that we have is about waste streams. And so I'd like to invite Jan to be prepared to respond to this question in respect to waste streams, in particular vanadium from fly ash or zirconium. So where does regulation of recovery from waste streams come in?
So there are several streams for regulation of waste streams. One of them is under the OGCA, and the waste management falls under that. Vanadium itself is regulated as part of the bitumen under the Oil Sands Conservation Act. So it's not specifically regulated under the MRDA. It's part of the oil sands. I do know, Kelsey and Sandra, you may also have background in this area if either one of you would like to chime in as well. And they're declining to do so.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, Jan, I think you did a great job there in terms of speaking to that. I don't know, Sandra, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, I was being polite. It's in the virtual session. It's who goes where and how here. No, Jan, I think you did a great job. That's exactly where it's covered.
Thank you so much for your responses, ladies. The next question we have is about regulatory transition and timelines, and the question is as follows: what is the current timeline for the regulatory transition from environment in protected areas? And so folks on the phone, that is the ministry that has replaced Alberta Environment and Parks. So it's called Environment and Protected Areas now. When is the transition from AEP to the Alberta Energy Regulator? Shoshi, I saw that you had opened your camera for a moment. Is there any other additional information that you'd like to share?
Just wanted to iterate that, yes, we're aiming from a government perspective, targeting for an early 2024 timeline. And as Jeff mentioned, because it's based on cabinet processes and government prioritization, it depends on when we can have those pieces fall in place for us to meet a certain timeline. So we're committing to early 2024.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a question related to information that has been important to the Albertans over the last number of years, in particular related to municipal taxes. And I'd like to call on Sandra to be prepared to respond to this question, or potentially Jan, or anybody who feels like they would like to weigh in. So the question is as follows. The presenters talked about now being legislated to manage minerals extraction. Will the Alberta Energy Regulators require these companies to pay their municipal taxes or block these companies from licenses? Municipalities pay for roads and services. This has not been shared from any presenters as of yet.
I'm 100% going to tap Jan for this question. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so I anticipate that mineral approval holders will be under the same types of scrutiny that oil and gas operators face with respect to a check for paid mineral taxes prior to licensing approvals. The liability management, I won't say the exact framework, but those principles will apply across our entire enterprise. So yes, I do suspect there will be a check for mineral taxes, for municipal taxes paid prior to receiving approvals.
Thank you so much for your responses. And I just wanted to let everybody know that as we respond to these questions and we receive more questions, if there's any questions that we're not able to address during the time that we have allotted with one another today, we will be sure to respond to those questions in writing at a later time. So our next question in the queue comes from Eric. And this question is related to a current directive, Directive 82. So the question is as follows. Will extraction from rock-hosted mineral sources have the same resource recovery requirements outlined in Directive 82? If so, why? No other jurisdiction would have this requirement. And if I may call on Sandra to please respond to this question.
That's a great question, and thank you. We don't know yet. We're not sure.
Thank you. And so you can continue to remain engaged in the process. And as we mentioned earlier, this is just the first step. We're going to be continuing to develop our thinking on these topics. They're really important topics to Albertans. So the next question is from David. And this is specific to a particular mineral in terms of development in Alberta. And so I might call on Kelsey potentially, and maybe Janet and Sandra to be prepared as well to supplement. And the questions are solutions for selenite from production process also being encouraged by the province?
That's a great question, but on that one, in terms of solutions for production, I'm gonna have to turn that one over to Jan and Sandra.
Thank you.
So I'm a little bit out of my realm. I am not a mining process specialist. I'm more of a subsurface specialist. I would want to ask, I'm assuming that you're talking about solutions for something, it's a leftover following extraction of minerals in the facility process. And you're wanting to know if there are any specific rules or will be any specific rules to that. So the answer is not yet, but if you recommend certain solutions, or if you have solutions in mind, we certainly would like to hear about it through your survey responses or through minerals@aer.ca.
That's a fantastic reminder, Jan. The survey is that's kind of going to come at the end of this presentation and later on as an email, has opportunities for long form feedback. And so we definitely are open to that avenue. And you can also email us, as Jan had mentioned as well. So this next question is a fairly lengthy one. And so maybe we'll break it up into a couple of pieces. So the question is about rights. And so I might ask our colleagues at the Government of Alberta to be prepared to speak as well. So the question is, if an oil and gas company holding Crown petroleum and natural gas rights applies to license an oil and gas well, and it is widely known that there will be brine production incidentally with the oil and gas, Will the Alberta Energy Regulator accept a statement of concern from a person holding the brine-hosted mineral lease? And just as a friendly reminder, our topic today is also related to rock-hosted minerals, but we're very happy to receive all questions. And maybe I'll repeat that question again for everybody's sake. The question is, if an oil and gas company holding Crown Petroleum and Natural Gas rights applies to license an oil and gas well, and it is widely known that there will be some brine produced incidentally alongside the oil and gas, will the Alberta Energy Regulator accept a statement of concern from a person holding a brine-hosted mineral lease?
So I'm going to invite our colleague Michael Morskat to talk about mineral tenure and rights. I can speak briefly on behalf of the Alberta Energy Regulator. So under RETA, we must file public notice of application. Public notice of application normally occurs over a 30-day period. Any interested party may file a statement of concern, and the AER will accept that statement of concern. I cannot comment on whether the statement of concern would lead to a hearing or not. That is a decision unique to each application, and that decision would occur as part of the review process. Over to you, Michael,
Okay,
to talk about tenure.
Thank you, and hi everybody. I'm Michael Morskat, Director of Coal and Mineral Development in Alberta Energy and Minerals. So with respect to just specifically the rights between oil and gas production and brine-hosted mineral production, when we talk about brine-hosted mineral rights, what we're referring to and would be controlled under brine-hosted mineral tenure are specifically the extraction of or recovery of those dissolved substances that are in the brine and can be recovered as minerals, not the water itself. So the petroleum and natural gas operator is still free. That we're not taking any position or any ownership from those operators with respect to extracting water as a byproduct of their oil and gas production. That still is a separate commodity or separate. The Water Act is really under the jurisdictions, or water itself is under the jurisdiction of the Water Act. So from a mineral rights perspective, we are not looking at the water itself, and we're looking at the recovery. So the oil and gas operator is still free to co-produce that water and dispose of it as it would, and just does not have the right to recover those dissolved substances that would come out of it. And then, as Jan said, any statements of concern with the conflict between different resources would be handled going forward and through the AER's normal processes.
Thank you so much. We just, as a friendly reminder to the folks in the audience, we kindly ask that you submit one question at a time to give room for as many questions from different audience members as possible. And like I mentioned, if we don't address every question in this session, we will respond to those unanswered questions in writing as well. And so the next question that was submitted by Kennedy is as follows. As the government has highlighted the importance of critical mineral mining for decarbonizing our economy and supplying renewable energy technology, will the Alberta Energy Regulator include climate change mitigation adaptation into its risk assessment for projects? For example, if a mine impacts a natural carbon storage solution like a wetland, grassland, or boreal forest, how is that weighed, or could it be included into an AER's consideration process? So this question is about the environment, and we are also excited to be able to share questions with our colleagues at Environment and Protected Areas in areas where we may not be able to respond at this exact moment. And so I thank you so much for this question, And we're going to kindly submit this question to our colleagues and respond to you in writing at a later time. But thank you very much, Kennedy, for asking the question. The next question is from Chris. Chris asked, what are the regulations for setting up remote fuel caches, drums and/or bladders for mineral exploration projects? Is there a limit on the number of liters that can be cached? So again, the question is, what are the regulations for setting up remote fuel caches like drums or bladders for use in equipment or in operations for mineral exploration projects? Is there a limit on the number of liters that can be cached? And I may ask Sandra to respond to this question.
Great question. I have no idea off the top of my head. This is still regulated by GOA, but Chris, can you please make a note and we will get back to you with a response.
That sounds great. So thank you so much for that. And we also really appreciate and acknowledge your patience in the audience. We're really early in this process, and we're learning together, and we're going to be continuing this conversation as we go forward. So the next question is as follows. And this question is for Kelsey as it relates to the geological survey and the mapping program. Heather asked, will the geological survey be mapping the location of critical minerals in tailings or other wastes?
Okay, great, thank you. Great question, Heather. And so yes, we are having a look at some of the critical minerals that are found in the tailings and waste, because that gives, as long as we know that they're in place or in location, because that also gives us great information about those host units and the critical minerals that are also being produced kind of in conjunction with other activities. So absolutely, we are looking at that information and incorporating it. We just want to be really, really clear that we, and that's going to be available in the metadata and the data that you'll see when you access it to see how and where those samples were obtained. So absolutely, it's something for consideration. We just need to be really careful about potentially looking at, say, critical minerals or anything in waste that's traveled. We need to know that, or be really comfortable and confident in knowing its original source location. So those are just a couple of factors in place, but absolutely, we're having a look at all critical mineral information that we can get access to.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Our next question is related to transition to the AER and about renewal applications. And if I may ask Jen to be prepared to speak to this question. So the question is as follows. At the time of transition in 2024, as expected, how will renewal applications that are in review with environment and protected areas be handled?
That is a great question, and thank you for asking. So I am working with my GOA colleagues now, discussing transition of approvals for existing operators. Rest assured, there will be a process for you, and we will communicate with you, likely through environment and protected areas or through forestry and parks, on what processes you can expect and what changes, if any, will occur at transition for you. So please stay tuned. We have not defined the specifics just yet, but we will communicate with you prior to and during transition.
Thank you so much, Jen. And does that include applications that are currently moving through the regulatory process at environment and protected areas?
Yeah, so historically, I can go back personally to when we did RAP and created the AER, right? So historically, we will consider existing approvals, existing applications, and make also new applications or new activities as we think about proclamation. And so existing applications and existing approvals, there will be processes to transition those to the AER, and those will be communicated.
Thank you so much. This next question relates to exploration. So I may ask Sandra to be prepared to respond. Will exploration commitments be made part of the permitting and licensing process for maintaining claims or permits or licenses? So I'll repeat that. Will exploration commitments be part of the permitting or licensing process for maintaining claims on the land, permits, and licenses? For example, you have to spend so much of a year or a person or company to acquire the mineral rights and hold on to those for a long period of time without exploration. So the exploration piece also including a tenure piece, and I might ask Michael to be prepared to speak to the tenure regulation as well. So if you like, I can repeat that question. Just let me know.
Okay. Sandra, do you want me to start or do you want to go?
Oh, absolutely, I do.
Okay.
Take it away, Michael.
So from a tenure perspective, we still have the claims or rock-hosted permits that are now called with the new tenure regulation that went into effect January 1st of this year. So formerly they were called metallic and industrial mineral permits, and now that we've split the rock-hosted rights and brine-hosted rights apart into separate agreements, they're now called rock-hosted permits. And we have maintained the work requirement on those permits, so they're broken up into 2-year work periods, which with a minimum level of exploration required on a per hectare basis. That needs to be reported through a mineral assessment report. So those requirements are still maintained to maintain the tenure side of it, so that rock-hosted permit, and we did escalate those or increase those minimum work requirements slightly with the update, but they're so that still is a requirement for those permits.
And for what, and I'm gonna try not to be elusive and non-committal here, and I'm gonna elaborate a little bit on this. So it's whatever is currently in place now is what's currently in place. Again, that's not within the AER's jurisdiction. However, again, this is not a one and done. So if you have if you have suggestions, if you have improvements, if you have comments, anything like that, prior to us publishing our directive, it is going to be available for public comment. And that means anybody can review the draft and put their comments, their thoughts, the whole gamut in there. And if it's something that you think should be included, please make sure that you include that in the draft. But that's not the only place for that. We also have the minerals.ca inbox, which, by the way, these are the people that it connects with out of that team for us to be able to keep track of that as awareness. And then there's other things as we move through the transition period until the AER does get proclaimed. And so please, and who was the name of that gentleman, Chris, that submitted that question?
That was Ken. Ken
okay.
Submitted the question.
Okay, and so I do believe, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in attendance here will also be notified when the directive goes out for public comment, and that'll be an opportunity for you to input that as well. So I appreciate the comment very much so, and really look forward to hearing what you guys have to say and recommend. Jan?
Yeah, and I'd like to add, exploration will continue to be regulated under the Mines and Minerals Act Part 8 and under the Metallic and Industrial Mineral Exploration Regulation. You know, all requirements under that act and under that regulation will continue, and you'll simply have a new regulator responsible for those approvals and that oversight, but the act and the regs for exploration itself are not changing in the near term.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat from Kevin, and I just wanted to acknowledge his question. The question is as follows: will past land use designations be reviewed with this mineral plan and transition? For instance, consideration given to mineral mining beneath prime protection areas. Thank you so much for the question, Kevin. And I just wanted to reiterate that some of the questions that we received today are important questions to Albertans that share this sentiment. And unfortunately, the Alberta Energy Regulator does not have jurisdiction over every aspect or every feature of environment. We make regulations, but we will pass this question on to our colleagues at Environment in Protected Areas. And the other thing that you can do is you can look at the Alberta government's webpage under the land use framework page to learn more about some of the important topics that are being addressed today. So at this time, I'd just like to call on the audience to please submit your questions. We still have some time, but we would be happy to entertain as many questions as possible. And if there's no more questions at this time, we would be happy to talk about what you can expect from the AER in the coming weeks and months and into the future. So I'll give it a few more minutes for some final questions. And we've received the question. So the question is as follows: can you confirm that freehold mineral owner rights are being considered in the new regulations, specifically relating to target areas, spacing units, pooling, unitization, and schemes, or whatever terms these relate to in petroleum and natural gas concepts may be called? Primarily, this is related to ensuring equity for freehold lands laterally or diagonally related to Crown lands. And so because this question relates to rights, I would politely ask that our colleagues at the Government of Alberta be prepared to share some insight. And again, we're happy to follow up as well.
Okay, I can give a little bit of an answer. I don't think we have a complete answer to this question at this point, just given where we are with development. So on the rock-hosted side, at this point, we don't have any really special considerations for freehold, just given the fact that we have freehold rights and Crown rights being quarried. Rock-hosted minerals are quarried already, and this is sort of, and because they're solid mineral substances, you can sort of really differentiate where production is occurring. I think where we could get into some requirements for other considerations is on the brine-hosted development side, where you can have the same kind of crossover of rights between Crown and freehold when we're extracting brines from the subsurface. But we don't have any specific solutions for this at this point. Right now, we've worked on the tenure regulations and sort of the regulatory framework, and I think we anticipate that freehold considerations like this may be something that we'll have to look at in the future as the sector progresses and we get more development.
I can add, we did contemplate drainage, spacing, and there's just, without having examples of development yet, it's too soon to put in drainage areas or spacing units. And I think essentially the Government of Alberta would be directing us that these things are required. We did anticipate that there could be conflicts and ensured there is a subsurface spacing or a subsurface order provision in the brine-hosted mineral rules, should we need to use it. Potentially that could be triggered through an SOCN hearing process if it was required prior to any spacing being developed.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much, Michael. So we received a question about the application process. The question is from Doug. How does the Alberta Energy Regulator intend to work with industry, First Nations, and government to expedite the permit application process? Maybe I'll share this question with Sandra for response. And the question is again, how does the Alberta Energy Regulator intend to work with industry, First Nations, and government to expedite the permit and application process?
That's a great question, and this is part of it. So it's wonderful. It's having the information sessions, the engagement sessions, opportunity for input, opportunity for review, taking on your suggestions, recommendations, review of any drafts that we have. And of course, if there's things with the GOA to direct or connect with them, as well as individual communities. But yeah, there's a multitude of ways, and this is part of why we're starting this information session and then continuing on as we get ready for proclamations, so that we can hear what everybody would like to say and like to do. And if anybody wants to know about, for example, timelines that we have right now, I can share the link with Chris. We do have our target timelines for our approval processes and application processes throughout the specified and energy enactment requires that we can share for our existing, like what's currently within our mandate. Jan, is there any more, or Chris?
I think you covered it. You know, if anyone has any suggestions on how the participant involvement process can be expedited, we can share that with our colleagues at government. And we'd love to hear any suggestions, but it is a very necessary process.
We have another question that's quite related with respect to timelines for application processes for applications within the hard rock and brine hosted mineral space. So Randine had asked, in licensing the first lithium wells and facilities in Alberta, we worked together to create the compliant process. However, the timing to license approval has been expected to be 90 days. Is this going to be expected with rock-hosted mineral applications? When is the Alberta Energy Regulator expecting to reduce these expected licensing timelines?
Yes.
Go ahead, Jen.
So rock-hosted approvals, depending on the size of a quarry or a mine, can expect to take considerably longer. For instance, an APIA approval for a new APIA-related activity is a minimum of 175 business days. We can rock-hosted approvals for a large size quarry or mine will take at least that long. For brine hosted development approvals and for geothermal in the mandate expansion area, we do anticipate that these timelines will go down. It's a learning process for the regulator and for our staff reviewing the applications as well. So we want to be as transparent as possible, allow industry applicants to be able to plan their developments. And so we do tend to give long timelines or longer timelines that we can meet. So as we get better at reviewing these, as we get more comfortable with these applications, those timelines will be reduced.
Thank you. And similarly, in that vein, there was a question related to the scale or the size of the application. Does that influence how the regulatory process unfolds?
It absolutely does. If you look at the history of oil and gas development, right? The first oil or gas well probably took a lot more than 15 minutes baseline. Well, probably took a lot more than 15 minutes to review, right? It's through 80 years of experience that the regulator is able to automate certain aspects of wells and has the experience to know that, for instance, a high H2S well will never be a 15-minute approval. It will always be a 45 to 60-day approval to make sure there's enough review. So it's based on size, it's based on complexity, and our first objective at the regulator is to ensure public safety, environmental protection, in the interest of Albertans, and we will take the time to do that properly.
Thank you so much. We had a follow-up question related to tenure, and maybe I'll ask my colleague Michael from the Department of Energy and Minerals to be prepared to consider this question. The question is from Robin, and as follows: Will there be an offset royalty obligation similar to what there currently is in place for oil and gas?
Thanks, Chris. So this is going to have a similar answer to my previous one related to freehold, as we're not quite there yet with the answer to this. We're still developing or looking at the royalty for specifically Brian Hostetter, if this is something that needs to be changed. We have our current royalty regulation that deals with royalty on metallic industrial minerals, but there isn't any sort of accommodation for freehold development. So in the future, if this is something that we see as needed, we'll potentially look at it, but there's nothing planned or on the books right now.
Thank you so much. Just wanted to acknowledge a question that we received in the chat about permit applications and related to mineral claims handled when an application is denied as a result of caribou migration areas or objections from right holders around the claims in question. It's a question that we appreciate receiving, and unfortunately, we're going to have to share this question with our colleagues in the government of Alberta for a response at a later time. So we will respond to you in writing as soon as possible.
Chris, I can just speak a little bit to the assessment requirement part if you want. So yeah, not speaking to kind of overall caribou management, but we currently have in place the ability to extend requirements. We've done this already for caribou range planning activities across a number of different commodities. Is provide extensions to broad extensions related to caribou planning, and for any mineral rights we have the ability for situational extensions if there's reasonable circumstances. So
thank you. And also thank you for the questions. Even if we're not able to address them at this time, these are really important for us as we continue our engagement. And so really appreciate all of your thoughtful time and consideration into asking some really important questions that a number of Albertans are going to share interest in. And just as a friendly reminder, we will be posting the session on the website within the coming days, along with the associated materials. So you can expect to see that. And please provide your response to that survey. If you have some interesting ideas related to some of the questions that you've asked, we'd encourage you to share those recommendations in that platform as well. So we had a question from Jimmy that I wanted to address, and thanks for your patience, Jimmy. The mineral industry is one of the higher electricity demanding fields. Has the Alberta Energy Regulator any actions intended to help the industrial players by providing cheaper electrical power sources so that the players have the opportunities to mitigate environmental footprints by using simple process dominated by electricity. And an example is for impurity removal from mineral processes could be achieved through conventional chemical processes, which require higher chemical reagent consumption, water usage, etc. Or on the other hand, an electrodialysis process, which needs far less reagents. Reagent is like a chemical solution or helps to facilitate a chemical process, and water consumption, except for electricity usage. So thank you so much for your question. The Alberta Energy Regulator doesn't have jurisdiction over electricity generation, but we can definitely share your question with our colleagues at the Alberta Utilities Commission. And if there's any additional follow-up that Jan or Sandra or Jeff or the SMEs would like to offer, please feel free to weigh in. Thank you so much for your question. So we had a question from Spencer as well. So Spencer asked, as we know, the pore space within the geological zones where the brine production is complicated, and it contains oil, natural gas, and brine as well. How does the Alberta Energy Regulator propose to protect the existing petroleum and natural gas rights holder and the public from petroleum and natural gas products produced in association with brine and disposed by rock-hosted mineral producers? So it looks like the question relates with kind of co-production of multiple different products under a single license. Jan, would you like to speak to this question?
I can speak to that question. So we have contemplated situations where an oil and gas producer may produce water with lithium in it, produced water. We've also contemplated situations where a lithium producer may produce hydrocarbons. This might be boring, but frankly, the public notice of application system exists for all, as does the statement of concern process, the opportunity to file a statement of a concern, and if those concerns once reviewed, the opportunity to trigger a hearing. So essentially, if you believe that your oil and gas is at risk of being produced from a lithium producer, you would have the opportunity to file a statement of concern to their well or well pad application.
Thank you so much, Jen. We had a question related to transition. And so maybe, Jan, if I could ask you to be prepared to think about this question as well, because you're already in the smart seat, so might as well leverage that.
I could handle getting off the smart seat for a minute. That's okay.
It's not possible. You're there for you're pretty smart. So for facilities currently in operation without an environment and protected areas approval, or grandfather, for example, if they already have an approval, does the Alberta Energy Regulator have a transition process in mind, or is it something being developed? Or can any information be shared about what to expect from an operator's perspective to prepare for that transition?
So for existing operators of either brine-hosted APIA or Water Act approvals, or for rock-hosted approvals, please direct these questions to your current regulator, and they will respond to you. So they remain your regulator until the MRDA is proclaimed early next spring. We are considering all approvals and how those approvals will be transitioned, and will communicate with approval holders as proclamation gets closer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes. I just wanted to give a quick notice about the time we're at. We have about 10 more minutes in our session, and we'd like to spend about 5 minutes talking about the next steps. And Carol is very excited to share that information with you. So we have a few more minutes for questions, and I'd like to give it an opportunity to. I see one that's popped up in the chat. Will the Alberta Energy Regulator have the ability to overrule the MDP or LUB of a municipality like the Natural Resource Conservation Board can? And so I really appreciate that question. And just for my own sake, really, could you please help me to understand what the MDP or LUB is, and also for the benefit of folks who don't know what that acronym stands for. So you can use the little chat there, I noticed, or you can add a comment. And while we wait for that definition, I can see there's
I can just jump in and say municipal development plan and land use bylaw.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Carol. So would any of our subject matter experts like to consider that question?
So the AER will be taking on authority for environmental impact assessments that currently reside with NRCB. If those are overruled as part of an energy impact assessment, perhaps we would need much more context to answer that question. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's fair. At this point, we haven't discussed that particular authority, and we're, things are still in full transition at this point. So it's a discussion. Again, great question. We add it to the hopper, and we hope to have an answer, but that'll take us a little time before we probably get to that answer. So I think at this juncture, certainly it wouldn't be something that would be overlooked, in the sense that if it currently exists, then there's a reasonable chance that it's going to transition over. It's certainly going to be examined from the perspective of what's appropriate. I know that there's reg making authority under the MRDA for in the municipal space, but at the present time, there hasn't been any discussion as to what this might look like. So I would say it's an unanswered question that is part of the inventory of things that we have to answer before we get to proclamation.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Jeff and Jen, and for your question as well. So we have a question in the chat from Cal, and the question is, will the Alberta Energy Regulator be working with other provincial regulators in the development of the rules and regulations surrounding mineral development in Alberta? If I may pass this to Sandra for a response.
Really good question on that. So so the policy stuff, so the interprovincial stuff and everything like that, it rests with the different departments in the government of Alberta and federal and all those kind of things. However, have we absolutely had conversations with jurisdictions that currently regulate minerals? Yes. And are we looking at existing regulations that are provincial, territorial? Yes, we are absolutely asking questions and looking at existing regulatory frameworks throughout Canada.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandra. And we have time for one more question. And the question is from Robert. Thank you so much for your question, Robert. Has there been specific and focused consultation with the federal government in the development of the proposed provincial guidance documents in relation to brine-hosted minerals or ongoing monitoring that may be required? So these are questions including fisheries, oceans, Canada, environment, and climate change as well. So I believe this is a very good question for our colleagues at Environment and Protected Areas with the Government of Alberta. And Robert, we will be sure to forward your question to our colleagues and get to a response in writing. So just wanted to say thank you so much. And I know that that's not what you want to hear at this time, but we're very, we will make that commitment to share that information. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for everybody for participating today. And I'll pass it now to Carol to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Chris. And on behalf of the AER and the Alberta Geological Survey, and then also our colleagues at in the government of Alberta that were on the line, thank you so much for attending today's session. There has been such a good breadth and depth of questions today, and quite a variety of perspectives shared. And so, I feel it was very rich. We shared a lot of information. There's a lot of topics that came in, and we really appreciate that. As Chris has said, it's unfortunate we can't answer all the questions in detail today, but this is the trade-off of us coming out early in the game as the regulations are being planned for and developed to be talking to a variety of publics all the way along, and knowing that there are clearly other opportunities. And on that note, I just wanted to highlight that when I talked about next steps, one of them was 2 virtual industry workshops, and to put into your calendar, those are scheduled for August 2nd and 3rd. Again, apologies for the August timeline, but this is what we need to do to move the work forward in the time that we have. And so August 2nd and 3rd for industry workshops, and the other public in-person workshops that I talked about, we haven't scheduled and clarified yet exactly where and when, and we will let you know as soon as we know, so that you can plan for that. But it will happen in the fall. So we learn a lot from your questions. We learn a lot about your interests, your concerns, and the potential impacts, and we will start working with this information right away. Please keep an eye out for the survey, as Chris has said, or in the next slide, which we can turn to now even, the QR code that you can actually just hover your phone over and answer the survey right away. We've got some information there about how today went, but also, or questions there about how today went, but also about can you start sending us the wording around your concerns and your ideas right away. So great session. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you at an engagement session soon in the future, and we hope to hear from you as well. Thank you very much.